No. Came sideways that night, the way it only does in late February when winter has stopped pretending it might end. It hissed against the front windows of the Birchwood diner and piled up on the sill in soft, sliding drifts, and every time the door opened the cold reached all the way to the kitchen pass. Out on Highway 11 the plows had gone by twice, already, their amber lights sweeping the empty road, and still the white kept coming down like the sky had given up holding it. Inside, the diner held its small warmth the way it always did. The hum of the pie cooler, the rattle of the furnace kicking on, the smell of coffee that had been sitting on the burner a little too long. There were maybe 4 people left at that hour. A trucker nursing a cup in the corner booth. A couple of teenagers splitting fries by the door, and Stan, who came every Tuesday and Thursday and ordered the same hot turkey sandwich and never once tipped less than he could manage. Tessa Doucet moved between the tables the way she'd moved through most of the last 3 years, which was to say steadily, without letting herself stop long enough to feel how tired she was. She was 38, she had a knot in her lower back that never fully went away anymore, and a pair of shoes she'd resoled twice, because new ones weren't in the budget, and she had a 5-year-old named Felix at home with the Peterson girl next door, who charged $8 an hour, and was worth every cent and more. $8 an hour. Tessa did that math in her head more often than she'd admit. She did a lot of math in her head. It was a habit that had grown into her the way ivy grows into brick, slow and then everywhere, the rent math, the hydro math, the how many shifts till the truck payment math. Her ex had been gone 2 years now, off somewhere out west chasing work that never seemed to send money back, and she'd stopped waiting for the checks a long time ago. It was just her and Felix, just the two of them, in the little, rented half-house, on Maple Street, with the radiator that clanked, and the window that wouldn't quite shut. She wiped down the counter and refilled Stan's coffee without being asked, and he gave her that nod he always gave, the one that said more than thank you. Brutal out there, he said, or brutal in here too, if Roland doesn't fix that back door. She tilted her head toward the kitchen where the cook was scraping the grill. Wind comes through like it pays rent. Stan chuckled into his cup. He was somewhere past 70, a retired millwright with hands like worn leather, and he'd been coming to the Birchwood since before Tessa started there. He knew her son's name. He knew she was raising the boy alone. He never said anything about it, which was its own kind of decency in a town small enough that everybody knew everybody's business, and most of them weren't shy about it. It was nearly closing, when the door opened again and the cold walked in. Tessa felt it before she saw them. That gust, that swirl of snow across the linoleum. And then a woman stepped inside, stamping her boots, and behind her, half hidden in her coat, a little boy. The woman was young. Younger than Tessa maybe, though hardship has a way of smudging a person's age. She wore a thin spring jacket zipped to the chin, the wrong coat entirely for a night like this, and a toque pulled low, and her cheeks were raw and red from the wind. She had the look of someone who'd been walking. Not driving. Walking, in February in a snow squall with a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. He had a striped scarf wound twice around his neck and mittens that didn't match, one blue, one gray, and he was holding a small cloth bag against his chest, the way some kids hold a stuffed animal. Like it was the only solid thing in a slippery world. His nose was running. He didn't wipe it. He just looked around the bright warm room with enormous, careful eyes, the way a person looks at something they've been told not to want. Sit anywhere, Tessa called over, automatic. I'll be right with you. The woman didn't move toward a booth. She stood just inside the door, and Tessa watched her gaze go to the menu board over the pass, and watched it move down the prices, and watched something in her face close like a hand. Tessa had seen that look before. She'd worn that look before. She'd worn it in the Foodland on a Thursday with a calculator app open in her coat pocket, putting the ground beef back. Telling herself she didn't really feel like spaghetti anyway. She knew exactly what was happening behind that woman's eyes. The frantic quiet arithmetic. The trying to figure out how to make a request sound like a choice instead of a need. Come on in out of the cold at least, Tessa said, gentler now. Sit by the heat vent there, you'll thaw out. The woman hesitated, then guided the boy to the booth nearest the radiator. He climbed in and kept his bag in his lap, his mittened hands wrapped around it. He still hadn't said anything. Tessa brought 2 waters and 2 menus, though she had a feeling the menus were a cruelty and wished she hadn't. We're all right, thank you, the woman said. Her voice was soft and careful, sanded down. We just needed to get out of the wind for a minute, warm up. We'll get going soon. Take your time, Tessa said. Storm like this, nobody should be out in it. The woman tried to smile and didn't quite make it. She looked at the boy. The boy looked at the laminated menu with its glossy pictures of clubhouse sandwiches and hot beef and pie, and his eyes moved across them slowly, and he didn't ask for anything. That was the thing that got Tessa, standing there with her order pad. He was a little kid in a warm diner full of food, and he wasn't asking for anything, because somebody had taught him not to, and she knew exactly how a person got taught a thing like that. She went back, behind the counter and busied her hands with the cream caddies, and watched them in the long mirror behind the pie case. The woman had her phone out, holding it low, and Tessa could see by the set of her shoulders that she was checking something. A balance maybe, or a message that wasn't coming. The boy whispered something to her. The woman shook her head, small, and Tessa saw her mouth the words, "I know, baby." A few minutes passed. The teenagers paid and left. The trucker dropped a couple of loonies on his table and shrugged into his parka. Stan stayed, working through the last of his turkey, watching the snow. Tessa wiped the same clean spot on the counter for the third time. Then she made up her mind the way she usually made up her mind about important things. Not in a flash, but the way water decides which way to run, finding the low place and just going. She filled a mug with hot chocolate, the real kind, the kind Roland made, with steamed milk for the regulars' grandkids, and she carried it over and set it down in front of the boy. "This one's on the house," she said. "We make too much of it and it just goes to waste. You'd be doing me a favor." The boy looked at the mug. Then he looked up at his mother, and Tessa understood that look too, the asking for permission look, the look that said he didn't trust good things to actually be for him. The woman's eyes had gone bright and glassy. "You don't have to do that," the woman said quietly. "Yeah, I know I don't," Tessa said. "Go on, hon, it's good, there's marshmallows." The boy wrapped both mismatched mittens around the mug and held it for a second just to feel the warmth of it before he drank. And that small thing. A kid holding a hot drink like it was something rare and precious. Sat down in the middle of Tessa's chest and stayed there. She crouched down a little, the way she did with Felix, getting on his level. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy glanced at his mother again. She gave a tiny nod. "Doan," he said. His voice was barely there a thread. "Doan, that's a good strong name." She nodded at the cloth bag in his lap. "And who've you got there?" He hesitated, then opened the top of the bag just enough for her to see inside. It wasn't a toy. It was a couple of folded shirts, a pair of small socks, a coloring book gone soft at the corners. It was everything a 6-year-old owns when everything a 6-year-old owns has to fit in a bag he can carry. Tessa kept her face easy. It cost her something, but she kept it easy. "That's a good bag," she said. "Sturdy. I bet you carry it yourself, big guy like you." "Yo." Owen nodded, pleased to be called a big guy. He leaned in toward her then and lowered his voice the way kids do when they're telling you the most important thing they know, the secret at the bottom of everything. "We don't have a place to sleep tonight," he whispered. "Mom said maybe the church, but it was closed. She said we just have to keep our coats on." Tessa did not let her face change. She would think later about how much it took not to let her face change. She just reached out and tucked a loose corner of his scarf back into his collar, the way she'd have done for her own boy, and she said, "Well, you're somewhere warm right now. That's the main thing, eh? One thing at a time." She stood up. She had to stand up. She went back behind the counter because she needed to do something with her hands and her face for a moment that the boy couldn't see, and she found she was gripping the edge of the steel prep table, hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She thought of Felix. Of course she thought of Felix. She thought of him asleep right now in his bed on Maple Street with the dinosaur sheets and the nightlight shaped like the moon, warm, safe, fed, with a roof that, for this month at least by the skin of her teeth, was paid for. She thought of how close her own life ran to the edge of the thing she was looking at across the room. One bad month, one blown transmission, one landlord who decided to sell. That was the distance between her and that booth. And she knew it, and she'd always known it. And most nights she got very good at not thinking about it. She couldn't not think about it now. Roland came to the pass and looked out at the boy with the hot chocolate and the mother with the spring jacket. And he looked at Tessa, and Tessa looked back at him, and a whole conversation happened without a word. "We're past close," Roland said finally, low. He was a big quiet man with a francophone lilt and a permanent burn scar on his forearm and a softness he tried hard to hide. "Grill's still hot though. Be a shame to clean it for nothing." "Be a real shame," Tessa agreed. "2 clubhouses," Roland said, already turning back to the grill. "Fries. Bowl of the soup for the little guy. And whatever's left of that hot chocolate, give it to him. I'm not carrying it home." Tessa went back to the booth. The woman had been watching the exchange and had clearly understood it. And she was already shaking her head, already half rising, the panic of being a burden moving across her face faster than the gratitude. Please, we can't. I can't pay for. Sit down, Tessa said, not unkindly, the way you'd say it to a friend. Please, sit down. The cook's already making it, and if you don't eat it I'll have to, and I've had a long shift. She managed a real smile. What's your name? The woman sat back down slowly. She put her hand over her mouth for a second, pressing the words back, and when she took it away she said, Carrie. Carrie, I'm Tessa. She set down cutlery rolled in paper napkins. And that's Roland back there pretending he's not a softie. We're glad to have you. Honestly, it's a slow night and the company's nice. Carrie's eyes spilled over then. Just 2 tears, quick, and she wiped them fast with the heel of her hand and looked at the table and said, in a voice that had stopped being careful and was just raw now, I didn't know what I was going to do tonight. I really didn't. I kept telling him it was an adventure. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh and wasn't. He's 6. He thinks everything's an adventure if you tell him it is. He's a good boy, Tessa said. He's the best boy. Carrie looked at Owen, who was carefully fishing a marshmallow out of his hot chocolate with a spoon, his whole small face given over to the seriousness of the task. I lost my place at the end of the month. The landlord sold. I had a bit put aside but the car needed brakes, and then I missed shifts because I couldn't get the car to the shop, and then I lost the shifts, and it all just... She made a small collapsing motion with her hand. It all just went so fast. People don't believe how fast it goes. I believe you, Tessa said quietly. I believe exactly how fast it goes. And something passed between the 2 women then, sitting in that booth under the buzzing light, with the snow coming down outside. A recognition. The kind that doesn't need explaining. Carrie looked at her and saw that she meant it, that it wasn't a thing she was saying to be kind. It was a thing she knew. The food came. Roland had made the clubhouses the way he made them for people he liked, which was to say overloaded, the bacon doubled, the fries heaped, and he set them down himself, which he never did, and he said, eat gruff, and went back to his grill before anyone could thank him properly. Owen looked at the soup, and then at his mother, and Carrie nodded, and the boy picked up his spoon. He didn't fall on it the way you might expect a hungry child to. He ate slowly, carefully, like he was making it last, like he wasn't sure there'd be more and didn't want it to be over. He blew on each spoonful even when it had gone cool. And Tessa, watching from behind the counter, had to turn away again and pretend to count the till. She thought about the $40 in her own coat pocket. It was supposed to be for the hydro, which was past due, which had a little orange disconnection warning, printed on it that she'd folded face down in a drawer. $40 wasn't going to fix Carrie's life. $40 wasn't going to fix Tessa's either, but she stood there doing the math, the real math, the kind that wasn't only about money. And she thought about Felix asleep under his dinosaur sheets. And she thought about a 6-year-old who carried everything he owned in a cloth bag and called sleeping in his coat an adventure. And the arithmetic came out the only way it could. Stan, in the corner, had been watching the whole thing the way old men watch, quiet and missing nothing. When Tessa passed his table he reached out and touched her sleeve. That woman and her boy, he said low. They got somewhere to go tonight? Tessa hesitated. I don't think so, Stan. The old man nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he already knew. He didn't say anything else. He just got out his wallet, a battered thing, soft as cloth, and he laid some bills on the table under his coffee cup, and then he got up and worked his arms into his big plaid coat and pulled his cap down and said, loud enough for the room, Tessa, the turkey was good tonight. Tell Roland. And then, quieter, to her alone, you'll do the right thing. You always do. Then he went out into the snow. Tessa cleared his table a few minutes later and found, under the coffee cup, far more than the turkey sandwich had cost. Far more than Stan on his pension, in his Resoled boots, had any business leaving. There were 3 20s folded together, and tucked under them a scrap torn from the corner of a placemat, with 2 words written in shaky old man capitals. For them. She stood very still, holding it for a moment. The diner hummed around her. The snow came down. Then. She did the thing she'd been deciding to do. Since the moment a boy in mismatched mittens whispered that he didn't have a place to sleep. She went into the back and got the phone book. The actual paper one Roland still kept by the prep station. And she found the number for the Lakeview Inn out by the highway junction, the cheap clean motel where the road crew stayed in summer. And she called them. And she spoke quietly for a few minutes, and she gave her own name and her own card number. The card she kept for emergencies and never used because every month was an emergency in its own quiet way. One night. Maybe 2. She did the math, and decided she would figure out the rest later. The way she figured everything out later, one shift at a time. When she came back out, Carrie and Owen had finished eating. The boy was drowsy and warm now, leaning against his mother's side, his cloth bag finally set down on the seat instead of clutched. Carrie was gathering herself to leave, bracing, and Tessa could see her dreading the door and the cold and the night, with no answer in it. Tessa sat down across from them, which servers don't do, and slid Stan's 320s and the scrap of placemat across the table. "This is from the old fella who just left," she said. "His name's Stan, he's a regular, he wanted you to have it." Carrie stared at the money and the two shaky words, and her face came apart and reassembled itself. "I can't, I don't even know him, why would he?" "Because he can," Tessa said, "and because somebody probably did it for him once, a long time ago. That's how it works, you take it. You let people be good to you when they want to be. It's a gift to them too, even if it doesn't feel that way." Carrie pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth again. "And there's a room," Tessa went on, before she could lose her nerve, keeping her voice very ordinary, like she was telling her the soup of the day. "Out at the Lakeview Inn, the motel by the junction. It's covered for tonight, and tomorrow if you need it. Just give them your name at the desk, they're expecting you. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm, and there's a bed, and a real lock on the door." Carrie looked at her. For a long moment she didn't understand. And then she did. And the understanding broke over her face like something physical. "You did this," she said. "It wasn't a question. You don't even know us. You did this." "I know enough," Tessa said simply. "I know that's a good boy who eats his soup slow. I know you walked here in a spring coat in February because you didn't have another option. I know how that feels, Carrie. I know it from the inside." She reached across and put her hand over Carrie's, just for a second. "Tonight you're warm. That's the main thing. One thing at a time. Tomorrow there's people who can help with the bigger stuff, the shelter in town, the family center. They're good, they're not what you think they are. I can write down the numbers for you. But tonight you don't have to figure any of that out. Tonight you just sleep." Carrie was crying openly now, the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who has been holding a great weight steady for a long time, and has finally for one moment been allowed to set it down. She pulled Owen close. The boy, half asleep, blinked up at his mother and then at Tessa. "Are we going somewhere?" he asked. "You're going somewhere warm, buddy," Tessa told him. "With a real bed." The Owen considered this with the gravity of a person weighing important news. Then he said, "Is it still an adventure?" And Carrie laughed, a wet broken laugh that was half a sob, and pulled him in and kissed the top of his head and said, "Yeah baby, the best kind." Roland called a cab. He knew the night driver, an old friend, and Tessa heard him on the phone in the back, saying something low in French and then, in English, No charge, Marcel, I'll square it with you, just get them out there safe." When the cab's headlights swung into the lot a few minutes later, Carrie stood and helped Owen into his coat and gathered his cloth bag, and at the door she turned back. She didn't have words, you could see her looking for them and not finding any big enough, so she just said, "Thank you, I'm going to pay this back. Someday, I'm going to pay it forward, I promise you." "That's the only way you can pay it back," Tessa said. "Go on now, get warm." And then the door opened and the cold came in one more time and they were gone. Two small shapes hurrying through the falling snow to the warm yellow square of the cab. And the diner was quiet again. Just the hum of the cooler. Just the furnace. Just the storm. Tessa locked the door and turned off the open sign and stood for a minute in the dim and let herself feel all the things she hadn't let herself feel while there was a kid watching her face. Roland came out of the back, wiping his hands on his apron, and stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a while. "You used your own card for that room," Roland said eventually. It wasn't a question either. "It's fine." Tessa. "It's fine, Roland, I'll manage. I always manage." He was quiet a moment. Then he reached into his apron and took out the night's tips from his own pocket. The cook's share, what little there was on a slow storm night. And he folded the bills and pressed them into her hand and closed her fingers over them before she could refuse. "For the hydro," he said. "Don't argue with me. I saw the envelope in your bag last week. You think I don't see things." He shrugged, gruff again, embarrassed by his own kindness the way some people are. "You took care of them. Somebody takes care of you. That's how it works, eh? You said it yourself." Tessa looked down at the money in her hand and felt her own eyes go hot, and she didn't argue with him. She told Carrie to let people be good to her when they wanted to be. It would have been a poor thing to refuse the same lesson herself. "Thank you," she said. "Go home to your boy," Roland said. "I'll close up." She drove home slow through the snow, the wipers thumping, the heater finally warm by the time she reached Maple Street. The Peterson girl reported that Felix had gone down easy and only gotten up once for water. Tessa paid her for the hours and a little extra she couldn't really spare, and then the house was quiet and hers. She went into Felix's room. He was a starfish across the bed the way he always slept, 1 foot out from under the dinosaur sheets, the moon night light glowing soft on the wall. She stood in the doorway and watched the small rise and fall of him breathing, warm and safe and fed under a roof that was, for tonight at least, paid for. She thought about a boy named Owen sleeping right now in a clean warm room at the Lakeview Inn, with a real lock on the door, and his mother sleeping for the first time in who knew how long without having to keep one eye on the dark. She thought about Stan in his Reese-old boots and his soft old wallet, writing for them in shaky capitals. She thought about Roland pressing his tips into her hand. She'd given what she had. So had Stan, who didn't have much. So had Roland. And somehow there had been enough. Not enough to fix everything. Not enough to mend the whole broken arithmetic of a hard world, but enough for one night. Enough to keep a small boy from sleeping in his coat. Enough to remind a worn-down young mother that the world was not, after all, entirely without mercy. Enough to remind Tessa herself, who needed reminding more often than she'd say, that she was not as alone as the late-night math made her feel. She tucked Felix's foot back under the blanket. He stirred and didn't wake. She kissed his forehead. Out the window the snow kept falling, softer now, the squall blowing itself out at last, settling over the town and the highway and the little motel by the junction in a clean white hush. Somewhere out there a boy was warm. And that was the main thing. One thing at a time. It does not take a fortune to change the shape of someone's worst night. It takes a hot drink set down without being asked for. It takes an old man's 20s under a coffee cup. It takes a cook who leaves the grill on past close. A stranger who knows from the inside how fast it all goes. A small kindness handed over at exactly the right moment in the cold. We spend so much of our lives believing we have nothing to give. Then, a child whispers something true into the warm quiet of an ordinary night. And we find out we had enough all along. I keep coming back to that bowl of soup, and the way Owen blew on every spoonful even after it had gone cold. A boy doesn't eat like that unless someone has taught him. Without meaning to, that good things run out. That picture stays with me because it shows you how cause and effect really work in a life. Carrie didn't end up walking through a February squall in a spring jacket because she made one terrible choice. It was a soul building, then a car that needed brakes, then missed shifts, then lost shifts, each thing knocking into the next like a row of dominoes nobody could reach in time. Most of us are closer to that than we want to admit. The distance between a warm bed and no bed at all is usually just one bad month and no one standing nearby. What I take from Tessa is that being a decent person isn't a feeling you wait to have. It's a thing you do with your hands when it would be easier to look away. She had a disconnection notice folded face down in a drawer and $40 to her name, and she still set down a hot chocolate without being asked. That's the kind of goodness that costs you something, and it's the only kind that really counts. But goodness on its own wasn't enough, and that's the part people skip. Tessa was also sharp. She read the situation fast. The wrong coat, the cloth bag, the menu prices doing their quiet damage on a young mother's face. And she didn't humiliate anyone or make a scene. She knew the shelter numbers, she knew which motel would take a late call, she knew how to make a gift sound like a favor so a proud person could accept it. Kindness without that kind of clear thinking can do real harm. Hers landed, because she understood people. And then there was the nerve of it. It's one thing to feel for someone. It's another to put your own emergency card down for a stranger's motel room, when your own roof is barely paid for. That took backbone. The willingness to carry a little more weight tonight, so a 6-year-old wouldn't sleep in his coat. That same steadiness is what kept Carrie putting one boot in front of the other through the snow, calling it an adventure so her son wouldn't be afraid. That's the whole quiet machine of it really. Tessa gave, so Stan gave, so Roland gave, and the giving came back around to her in the form of tips, pressed into her hand for a hydro bill. None of it fixed the world. It just got 3 people through one cold night, and reminded the rest of us that we almost always have more to give than the late night math says we do.